Greetings, my name is Demiso, and I am privileged to have with me two different perspectives, one from Latin America and the other from Francophone Africa. And we will be having this conversation in commemoration of Transgender Day of Visibility under the auspices of the theme Unity. This couldn't be more important given the fact that there's so many increases in the context of anti-rights and recognizing some of the injustices and inequities across the globe regardless of jurisdiction. And so, that being said, I'm going to ask my guests to introduce themselves and also illuminate why they think it's important for us to commemorate Transgender Day of Visibility. So, if I may start, who should I start with? Vida, please introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit about your work and also why you think it's important for us to commemorate Trans Day of Visibility.
Okay, thank you for having me. I'm Vida Guzzo. I'm from Brazil, based in Brasilia. I am trans woman and intersex woman, and work for two major organizations. Intersex Brazil, which is a organization focused on promoting and protecting the human rights of intersex people in Brazil, but specifically through advocacy efforts within our government. We have been able to create the National Working Group of Intersex People with the Ministry of Human Rights in Brazil. And I also work as a research director with a trans-led organization called Libertarian Union of Trans People, and raising data, ethical, reliable, timely, and disaggregated data in order to empower and uplift trans communities in Brazil. And I guess it's so important for us to celebrate this moment as we face persistent obstacles to the fulfillment of our human rights. And in Brazil, I guess it's an important moment for us to remember those who came before us, those who lost their lives fighting for trans equality in Brazil. Actually, in Brazil, we have a National Trans Day of Visibility celebrated in January, and it was an important moment as well for us to march through Brasilia, which is the capital city of Brazil, and unite trans people from all the country in order to demand our rights, in order to hold our government accountable for implementing national human rights policies that protect and promote the human rights of trans persons. And that's why I think it's so much important for us to celebrate such an important moment. Yes.
Thank you so much, Vida. And I think it's so important for us to understand different contexts, which is the importance of South to South solidarity, recognizing that it doesn't fit, linear M&E frameworks, and more importantly, a lot of the development work that we're seeing emerging. But I guess we'll get to that. And so, Latia, please do introduce yourself. Let us know what you're currently working with and why it's important for us to commemorate Trans Day of Visibility.
Thank you so much, Dumi. So I'm Natia. I'm from Ivory Coast and I'm based in Abidjan. I work with Outright International. I know Outright is a global organization, but I'm from the grassroots movement from Abidjan. I'm the founder of a trans-led organization named Transgender in Rights, but in French. And we do a lot of mobilization for the trans community around human rights education so that the community can be empowered in knowing what is human rights and how to use different human rights systems to advocate for the rights of our different communities. For some years, we've started to celebrate the International Transgender Day of Visibility, but not necessarily like in past years. It wasn't necessarily relevant as it is now, looking at the current landscape around the world. Ivory Coast have always been amongst the country who have not inherited from any British colonial law or anything like that. So we never had any kind of criminalization in Ivory Coast, and when you take the West African region, Ivory Coast was seen as this progressive country where we're not hearing anything about like criminalization or discrimination of LGBTIQ people and specifically trans people. And even in 2020, we were celebrating transgender women being added to the list of key population when it comes to addressing HIV related issues. And with the growing of the anti rights movement and all these things, Ivory Coast became less natural and with a tendency to move to discuss around criminalization and discrimination. And currently, it's very important to talk about unity, to talk about solidarity. I prefer unity because solidarity is the aspect and the manifestation of solidarity is not the same as unity because we can have like some kind of working together because we want to promote solidarity. But unity call us to like even if we had some issues together, even if we had some funding problems, even if we are competing for any kind of funds, with unity we have to put all these things aside and come together as a community to fight for our rights, for the recognition of our rights. And for me, I think um, understanding the importance of celebrating our visibility is a privilege because not all our communities, especially our communities that are in rural cities, rural neighborhoods, then don't necessarily understand what it means to be in a community that promotes solidarity and unity. That's why this idea of south to south collaboration, but also learning about strategy. I think it's the moment for that. It's the moment to open the discussion around how can I learn from my colleagues in Latin America and the Caribbean, how my colleagues in Latin America and the Caribbean can learn from me from West Africa, even you, like because we are on the same continents, but we don't necessarily do things
Very
the same
different,
way.
yeah.
You see,
So I think thank you so much for sort of illuminating the different issues, and I appreciate your different articulation of solidarity because I think we've often been told what solidarity looks like, but I think we also know that solidarity in many other manifestations is also Ubuntu, right?
Mhm.
I am because you are, and that's a shared African value, despite Lusophone, Anglophone, and Francophone Africa, right, and all those divisions. And so maybe I guess then the question really is, Vida, in bringing in this concept of unity, what do you think is needed for us to unlock what unity can look like and what unity can mean, particularly for, rural trans people that are in the margins, trans people that are sex workers, trans people with disabilities, to ensure that there's an intersectional approach. I mean, we are in the margins of the Commission on the Status of Women, and we're hearing all these 30 years, but we know that many trans people have been erased, have been exploited, and essentially non-existent in many of the narratives. And so I think then the question really is, how do we unlock this unity and how do we inculcate that culture of celebrating ourselves, of acknowledging and affirming ourselves, especially for those who are in the margins?
Yes. When you asked me about this, I remember a fish from Brazil. In the central west Brazil, there is a fish called the piraputanga. And the piraputanga's fishes, well, the monkeys in the riparian forests, they used to drop some fruits in the water, so those fishes would eat them, uh, relying on the excesses of those monkeys. But because of the plantation, because those monkeys became more and more scarce, and also tired of waiting for chance and goodwill of those monkeys, those fishes learned how to leap nearly a meter out of the water to get the fruits still hanging in the trees.
Wow.
And I bring this story just to illustrate. Yeah, because this is what has always defined the trans and intersex communities, especially those of the global south. Agency, resilience. We are resourceful, and we are innovative, and we have developed ways to to get what we need to thrive and survive. And yes, I guess that's the message for us to embody our agency, the the goodwill and good faith we have to actually change the world and to create the world we want to live in, to we want to see, and create this together. And I guess more spaces like these where we can exchange like our experiences and to learn from the experiences on the ground, from people deeply marginalized, historically marginalized. This is something very important, and most importantly, I would say the this capacity we all have to change the world, to create new, to connect in a personal level, to extend solidarity for each other, to hug each other. We are all humans. We need care and appreciation, and we have we have lived such an hostile context, and we need to give us what we are asking from the world, right? And then maybe the world will learn from us, but we need to prefigure this world we want to see. And this is the space for this.
And we're seeing all these different forms of creation and creativity through artivism. We're seeing it in the different ways in which queer folks are expressing themselves. We're seeing it in the ways in which there's intersex organizing, right? And I think it's very important because you mentioned a piece about history. And I mean, in as much as, yes, there's a very checkered and deeply violent and oppressive history, I want to turn to you, Lat, to maybe share and illustrate where there might be narratives that are positive. I know that, third gender diversity, in many historical contexts in the majority world, are often revered or were revered. And we acknowledge that in the advent of, missionaries and colonialism, that, the instrument of operating in binaries, in being very heteronormative and having certain standards that are cis and white and anything else that isn't necessarily looking or sounding like the British Empire. And so I guess then the question is, what can we learn from our history in gender diverse people being revered, in being these mythical, beautiful people that are supported across the majority world? And how do you think we can bring that in the same way that analogy around fish, in the ecology of our movements, in making sure that we are revered, in making sure that we occupy space in a beautiful and I guess a magnificent, fabulous, and allowing us to not necessarily just survive but to thrive.
Mm-hmm. I think the very interesting example is actually the post-colonial era. Mm. Why am I talking about that? Because in the post-colonial era, each country's decided like to have constitutions, laws, legislation, and things like that. And guess what happened? Those countries who had like some, some ways of functioning now move to having like laws and constitution, and have like criminalization in these documents. Like, my question most of the time to people is, you're talking about criminalization as something that is normal from global south countries, but actually it happened at the moment where we were reclaiming independence from colonial powers. And colonial powers, what did they decide? To have these kind of laws to criminalize our communities. And something that I've also learned is I am putting laws in place for something that I've seen, for something that has always existed. Violence against women is not something new. That's why we are talking about how to combat violence against women. That's the same thing. If our communities were something new, I think it would have been like in 2025 that now we are talking about like how should we criminalize these communities. But this happened like way before our different countries becoming more and more independent from colonial powers. Um, there's this history. I know, for example, in Brazil, people do voodoo. They do voodoo. And in Western Africa, there's countries that are also doing voodoo.
Even in
And
Southern Africa.
yes, in Southern Africa, even in Haiti. And actually, I've learned this history from activists from Haiti, where they were explaining the way that voodoo is used in Haiti to magnify our community, because there's this goddess with I don't remember the name. We should definitely go back to our archives, in our history. They were saying that this goddess, the amount of love she has for you determines how you're acting in society. And she's the one giving strength, beauty, giving power, giving this resilience to trans people for them to be alive. Just to say that in a world where we recognize that there's powers, there's energy, trans people exist. Trans people have always been there, but because we will learn that there's just one God, we need to do one God. Even this voodoo religion, this practice has been demonized
Yes.
in many regions. But when you look at our history, when you go back to the history, something that that I'm sad about is, for most of our cultural norms, history were shared vocally. We never had this, this way of writing down our history. That's why now we have to do more research, more documentation to learn from our past histories, our pre-colonial history. But we've always been there. We've always been we have always been everywhere in the world. That's why it's very important for us to have a specific day to celebrate. Celebrate our existence. I think the Visibility Day is, it's not just about visibility. It's more about our existence.
And that's powerful, because existence is resistance. And I think, what you speak about it's not just about the oral sharing of our history. I think it also lies in the fact that many of our songs are a mark of history, right? And that's passed down generations. Many of our prayers, many of the sayings, the idioms that we use, the phrases that we deploy whenever we're celebrating or when we're crying, the practices in the context of our traditions, the drawings and paintings, even on caves, that is a part of our history. And for me, that already marks that artivism is unique and distinct and inherent in our culture, because our cultures have consistently been stripped away. And I love how Mariam Makeba would speak about it, where she'd say, there's an assumption that we didn't exist, and then just because, a white man came, and then all of a sudden, boof, we exist, which isn't a reality. And I think, I just want to bring you in, Vida, to just give that, perspective from Brazil in terms of, just this history and what this should mean for us now today. And I say it because, there's some words in Setswana that you can recognize. I mean, people wouldn't exist if there weren't certain terminology, if there weren't certain words in our local languages. Like the word exists because something was seen. So someone decided to name it. And so as a virtue of having this long-standing history of not documenting through a white gaze, that already is proof that these words predated colonial masters and missionaries. And so for me, it's really trying to figure out, what is the other on the other end of the world? What is the context of some of these conversations, for us to really harness and recognize the beauty and diversity of, just gender diversity beyond binaries.
Mm, the first thing that pops in my mind when you ask me about this is the Pajubá language in Brazil, which resonates a little bit with what Latia was saying, because of that slavery people coming to Brazil, and African religions were brought by them as well. Yeah, of course, and Yoruba language as well. And for those trans women, sex workers, women working in the streets of Brazil during the military dictatorship, they used speak a language, a dialect, which is a mix of Yoruba language with Portuguese. So we have um, a new set of words and ways to narrate the world we see, especially developed to counter police vigilance, especially to escape police. So they would speak Pajubá and not Portuguese in order to so they wouldn't get caught by the police. And we use it till these days. We use words like amapo for a cisgender woman or aqué for money. In actually, it's such a powerful way to narrate our own story on our own terms, you know. And also, while Latia was talking, I was thinking about the recent history of Brazil, especially because democracy in Brazil um, is a young aspect of our political life. Because democracy in Brazil has around 30 years. The military dictatorship um, well, ended in 1985, around it. And our first constitution was in 1988. And in Brazil, we have actually, I guess, mastered the art of diversifying political engagement, especially after the federal constitution. Uh, we have experimented democracy in very creative, innovative ways, especially through channels of dialogue between state and society. The federal constitution founded what we know as those public policies councils, which were with participation of both civil society and the government. These are like sustained channels of dialogue with the government. And when Jair Bolsonaro came in 2018, the first thing he did was to extinguish um, those um, those councils, those platforms for exchange now, between civil society and the government. And of course, one of the first councils to go was the LGBTI Council. Um, and yet, we have still participated, we brought back a repertoire of interaction, a repertoire of social movements from before the federal constitution, where we had like those grassroots councils where only participate only those civil society organizations could participate. And during the, well, I'd say this authoritarian moment we lived through during Jair Bolsonaro's administration, we had like this grassroots popular council, for us, with 25 of the largest LGBTI civil society organizations in order to counter fascism, authoritarianism, and conservatism. And actually, we developed a full set of repertoires, both online and offline, to counter the COVID-19 pandemic, the public health crisis we were facing, and actually develop some strategies to counter an administration that wanted to basically kill every LGBTI person in Brazil. You know, so yeah, learning from history, learning from our language, I guess. Well, gathering all this experience in Brazil, I'd say we are very resilient and resourceful again, and we were able to make to conduct very assertive assessments of our realities, of our contexts, and in order to implement our the most powerful repertoire to survive very different moments in our history. Through language, through political organizing, we have been able to actually thrive under the worst circumstances we could ever imagine.
Thank you so much, Vida, because that's very important. For many of us in the majority world, this isn't something new. Many of our communities have lived in these crises in perpetuity, even when we knew that certain parts of our LGBTIQ community were getting advancements.
Let me just share. During my master's dissertation, I was interviewing some intersex activists, and I asked leaders, decision makers, if they thought we were living like a political crisis. And one of those activists responded to me, Vida, what difficult times we've been living since the years 1500s. I mean, crisis is such a constant
exactly,
for
right?
us. Yeah.
And I think for me, what maybe might be a little bit irritating is the fact that this resilience is celebrated. Meanwhile, they're not recognizing how traumatic it is. They're not recognizing how colonial it is. They're not recognizing how deeply binary and problematic it is. It's unimaginative. It's boring. It's static, you know? And it just reminds me of, Toni Morrison's word, which speaks about how, violence is, you're not human. It lacks intelligence. It needs to perform. It needs blood. It doesn't need any form of humanity, right? And so I think for me, just drawing off of that, I'm going to just shift gears a little bit. And then, Lat, it would be great to sort of appreciate the dynamics of everything that's happening in West Africa. I mean, it's like a hot pot of a mirage of challenges, democratic challenges, human rights challenges. I mean, Vida spoke about authoritarianism. We've essentially seen at least 3 coups d'etats in 3 specific countries, francophone countries, in very recent times. And I think what's more glaring is that this is not a unique narrative for West Africa, because I think in the last 5 decades, there have consistently been coups and coup attempts. And so I guess just in that analysis, where do you see trans bodies and experiences, particularly because we're seeing, and I don't think this is just as a result of, anti-rights movements. This is literally authoritarianism and the continuous policing of women's bodies. And I say this because anything that isn't cis heteronormative is often then considered othered, right? And you're finding the nation state deploying violence, you're finding communities deploying violence. And I think for us, it's recognizing that, a lot of these experiences, it isn't just individual. It is deeply structural, it is systemic, it's community-wide. And so how do we ensure that we're not losing the lessons, as, Vida just sort of shared all these different trinkets and solutions to the crises that are surrounding us. But maybe then the question really is, how, what are some of the, maybe let's say the top 3 things that you think everyone should know about that are critical in this time that we have endured, that we'll continue to endure, but maybe more importantly, that it should change the conversation, because it can't still be a conversation around health. It can't still be a conversation around, human rights, stigma and discrimination. There are other structural issues that need to be addressed.
Definitely. And one thing is democracy.
Okay.
We need our community to participate in the way that our countries implementing democracy. Yeah. I remember one conversation I was having with some activists back in Ivory Coast, where we were just chatting about the upcoming elections, and I was like, you know, in August 2024, we had this wave of anti-LGBT people pushing for criminalization. Even some deputy started to talk like, we're going to put that criminalization on the table so that parliamentarians can discuss how it goes with criminalizing the community. Because, we're close. We're not even close. Ghana and Ivory Coast is the same country, to be honest. Ghana and Ivory Coast is the same country. The only difference is Ghana speak English, Ivory Coast speak French. But in the way that they're thinking, most of the time, I've heard Ivorian people saying that if Ghana is talking about criminalization, why not Ivorians? Because we are the same. So it's not me saying that Ivory Coast and Ghana is the same thing. And the other thing is Ivory Coast is between Ghana and Liberia. So imagine. So we were talking about the upcoming election, and I was like, what do you think should be the most important thing for our community in this situation? Because sometimes I'm tired of the movement, the way that because when there's no crisis, some of our community members are like, oh, we are comfortable because there's no crisis. They don't see any problem coming. They don't see anything coming. So for them, we're comfortable in the country. So I tried to have that conversation, and people were talking, and I was like, do you know that the most powerful thing our community can do is make sure that we can also vote? Because by choosing a candidate, a representative, which is mindful of our lived experience, should be the only way to not go to criminalization. If Even if we are not interested in politics, me personally, I don't like politics, but we have to do politics because it's not just about human rights. It's about how how these issues are structural, from government imposing things to the countries, and imposing things to the population. So moving from we are a single community or we are, a minority. So these issues are not related to us, but in fact, they're related to us. So we should move from just talking about human rights. Still, human rights is a new discussed in Ivory Coast because for many years we were talking about health issues, HIV issues, COVID-19 recently, and things like that. And I've been in among like the young generation coming and saying, no, actually, we need to talk about gender equality. We need to talk about how we as trans women, we as trans people, and gender diverse people, we can access gender recognition, for example. And even if this is related to human rights issues, actually it's not human rights issues, it's politics. Because we need the government to have laws in place that give us the ability to have access to gender recognition. So I think there's also the point on development, sustainable development goals. We see our countries coming to the UN doing VNRs, presenting what they've been able to implement, and using UNDP office in the country, saying that since UNDP is pushing the development agenda, we are working with them. That means we are doing great on development goals. But actually, we should reframe also our language in the way that we're pushing for things. I've been able, me and other activists, we've been able to enter spaces where we were only discussing development goals. If the country is trying to achieve the development goals by 2013, and we are also having the same language, that means we need to sit at the same table, discuss the issues, and find ways to include the development part of our community. Our community participation is development for the government. Our community being able to sit in decision making spaces, being parliamentary, being mayor, being I don't know, for those who likes politics, these different positions, for our community to sit in those positions, it's something amazing that we should definitely start to think about. I know there's a dynamic between being a social justice activist and also being a politician, but I think we can definitely do both. Not everyone should be interested in it, but some people from the community should be interested in doing both or doing more politics to ensure that our voices is also on the table and we're making sure that where there are people saying no criminalization, there's our people in the room saying, no, 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 no. If you're talking about criminalization, then you're talking about me not participating in this decision making process. But actually, I need to be there. My community needs to be heard and be considered in the way that we are making decisions, but also the way that we are implementing policies as well.
And the personal is political. So I think Vida, maybe just to sort of appreciate, what do you think is like the one key big thing that people need to start paying attention. You shared so many different beautiful trinkets around Brazil's democracy, which I think is really quite powerful. For example, when you mentioned that you can vote from the age of 16, and then from 18 it's compulsory, which is very unique. I mean, it's unheard of, within our own context. And so maybe what is the one key thing that you think would be critical for us to learn from Brazil in countering fascism, in ensuring that our communities can actually unite, and ensuring that the underbelly of that uniting is deeply rooted in solidarity, is deeply rooted in recognizing our struggles.
Um, I would absolutely second Latia because democracy is such an important thing for us to hold, and our, our LGBTI community should participate more in broader democratic mobilizing.
Yeah.
And we should as well defend democratic values as one of as a beacon of hope for our existence. And as a key takeaway, I would say political participation of for us is a key element and a secure path towards the protection and the promotion of the human rights of all people, towards the uh, fostering of democracy. And yeah, with trans people from Brazil, we usually say, okay, Brazil is the deadliest country for trans people in the world. Last year, 2024, we 122 trans people, trans persons were violently murdered, uh, marking the 16th consecutive year that Brazil leads the world in the number of yes, and yeah, and an average life expectancy for a trans woman is 35 years. And okay, this is the reality. And yet, we have been able to elect um, 2 years ago the two trans women for the federal parliament. In the last local elections, more than 200 trans people were candidates. So that's why I second Latia, because this is so important when it comes to our public life, when it comes to the public sphere and how it's organized, because it's deeply forged in gender norms. It sanctioned gender identities, and that's also why those people, as candidates or elected, they face so much violence, but yet they are there in order to present our demands, to present our experiences, our lived realities, and say Oh no, I'm here. I'm here, and no.
Yeah,
Yes.
and this is so important because I think sometimes we underestimate it. And I remember in 2012, I was speaking to a friend and telling them about why can't we have LGBT election observers? Like, and for them it was like such a foreign concept, like it didn't make sense to them at all. And I was telling them, like, but we need to be a little bit more imaginative because this is about our lives, right? Why are we going to try and, it's not even about reinventing the wheel, it's about being literally feeding into the capitalist framework that we see in the philanthropy industrial chain. And I think for me now, it's really just trying to figure out, how can we instill joy? How can we instill serenity? And so that being said, I'm going to say one word, and then you must give me one sentence. One sentence.
Before that,
of what you think about that word.
Before that, I'm so impressed with what you've just mentioned, with what you just shared, because I remember it was in 2019, 2020, we had like a session where we were talking about human rights. We were talking about the rights to participation. And someone, which is a trans woman, um, she said, I don't think that political participation is something for trans people. I don't think that a trans woman can sit as parliamentarian here in Ivory Coast. And I was like, what do you mean? Like before being a trans woman, I can think.
And you're a citizen.
You're a
I'm a
citizen.
citizen.
You can elect. You can
Yeah.
vote.
And I've always been like searching for this kind of example, like hearing that more than 100 trans people decided to put the name on the list to compete with other cisgender people to make sure that they are sitting in position. Even the Argentinian special envoy for LGBTIQ rights, which is trans women. This kind of example.
It fills our heart with pure
I will
joy.
definitely leave this conversation hopeful.
Yes, it's
More
very
hopeful
nourishing and it's
and-
powerful, and we need more of these
Yes.
conversations. So that being said, the one word, let me say government. One sentence.
For government, engage right now with your government if it's possible. Otherwise, counter it. Yes.
Courts.
Oh, litigation.
What about litigation?
We need professionals from the community or professionals that are friendly. We need allies. We don't need professionals that are partners. No. We need professionals that are allies or even more that are from the community to start litigation to ensure that there's decriminalization, there's decolonization, there's gender identity laws putting in place in our different countries.
That's a long sentence.
Yes, we know.
Your sentence is very
Yeah.
long. Okay. Joy.
I guess this conversation fills my heart with pure joy. You give me pure joy. Being in community gives me so much joy, and I guess we deserve it. We are entitled to it, and I dream with a world where we can feel it more and more as soon as we have the conditions to it.
Funders.
We need support. You're seeing the cuts. You're seeing how communities are struggling to get access to funds even before the cuts. We have our community most of the time work on grassroots levels. We need support. We need funds. We need money. Yay. Yay.
And that being said, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Vida. Thank you so much, Latia.
Thank
This
you.
just justifies for us to be sitting on a stage in a plenary session, in a global conference where we're destabilizing privilege, power, and patriarchy. And that is how we commemorate International Transgender Day of Visibility. Thank you so
unity.
much.
In unity.
Unity.
Yay.
Unite.